What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Bogan Every Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything from faith, finance, and fitness to things that life throws us. And guys, before I introduce our next guest, I would just ask if you could subscribe if you're on YouTube and give this video a thumbs up and comment down below anything and everything. It helps out tremendously with the algorithm. If you're on Spotify, if you could give us a rating and a follow, it would help out as well. And if you are on Apple Podcasts, if you could give us a rating as well, it would help out tremendously with the algorithm of all platforms. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at Bogan Everywhere Podcast, at Bogan Everywhere Podcast. So we are switching things up. We're trying to go more into in-person interviews as much as we can. And that's what this episode is about. It's with Josh Walton from State Farm. Josh owns his own firm. He is a believer in Jesus Christ, and he has gone through crazy things that it's just not your average State Farm agent. And so with that said, we kind of go over, how can you own your own firm if you choose to, how you can work for State Farm if you decide to, and kind of like the process behind that, and a little bit about his testimony and how he views finances and just, some of the crazy stories that he's gone through. With that said, be sure to follow us on all these platforms. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And let me know what you think. Let me know what you think on this in-person podcast. I hope you enjoy. Josh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Been looking forward to this for a while.
I'm super stoked. Something I want to ask you that I ask all my guests is, what is something you would say to your 18-year-old self?
Oh, goodness. Just say keep running. Keep running. 18, that was a rough age for me. Mm-hmm. I went to the University of Kentucky, and I'd say my senior year of high school was probably one of the toughest times of my life. I found myself maybe not making a lot of the same decisions as the people I had hung out with through most of high school. Mm-hmm. And it was a really lonely time. And fortunately, God blessed me in a lot of ways during that time. I ended up getting an academic scholarship to the University of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Athletically, I got to do some really cool stuff that year. My team won the region, which is really big in Kentucky. In basketball, we got to go play in Rupp Arena, where Kentucky plays for the state championships, the Sweet 16, and I got to go watch Kentucky, who was my favorite team, win a national championship. All that happened kind of in March of that year, so it was a pretty cool time for me. But yeah, I would just say, keep running. My favorite verse at the time was, do not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize. Run in such a way as to get the prize. Mm-hmm. And I can't say I always had my eyes on the right prizes as I was growing up. But yeah, God is faithful. So I think I would have just come back and said, hey, trust Him. He's going to be faithful to you. Don't worry about a lot of the little stuff that you're going to worry about over the next several years.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And, what was going off that, what was your upbringing like? Were you obviously, you mentioned that you started off rough and stuff. Like, were you not raised in a Christian home? Like, what was your faith?
No, I was. I was very fortunate. Both of my parents are believers, were believers. I actually have an older sister, and we've been very close throughout most of our life. And I'll probably get to some things later, but so close that she gave me a kidney when we were in our early 20s. But I will never forget. Probably around the time I was 6, my sister had been talking a lot with my parents and made a decision that she wanted to follow Jesus. And she's very aggressive, kind of runs in my family. But anyway, I'll never forget her kind of looking at me in the back of the car and saying, look, if you want to go to heaven with me and Mom and Dad, you need to follow Jesus. And I was a little bit terrified, but it was at the age of 6. obviously due to my parents' influence, but also my sister, that I decided to follow Jesus. So I grew up learning what was true and learning what was right, and kind of through middle school and through high school. When I say it was rough, there were a lot of rough years. I don't think middle school's not a nice time for anybody. It didn't help that my parents were both teachers, and so I went to middle school where my mom was my sixth grade science teacher. But we have a lot of funny memories from those days. But as I grew up and kind of went off on my own to college, that was a really formative time for me, and really deciding who I wanted to be, what type of things I wanted to pursue. And even though it was only maybe a little over an hour away from where I grew up, there was definitely a point there where I had to really kind of own who I was going to be.
Yeah.
And it was a really good opportunity for me as well to say some of the things that have maybe held me back. I was, what most people find really surprising, I was maybe a little bit shy in school, middle school, even in high school. I feel like there were a lot of times where I didn't do things I wanted to do because I was worried about what other people thought of me.
Yeah.
And I will say I completely lost all of that when I went to college. I just did what I wanted and really had an awesome time. But, just kind of lost that maybe fear of man, and just decided, like, I want to do the stuff that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah. And so, from your shift, you graduate college. What did it look like for your next couple of years? Did you go into established career? Did you work full-time? What was that like for you?
So, it was really interesting. My first few years of college, I tried to do every single thing that a person can do on a large college campus. I was involved in a lot of stuff, and I had a really great college experience. I will say towards the end of college, I kind of, just started pursuing a lot of things for immediate gratification, and really kind of didn't have a very long-term mindset, just had a much more short-term mindset. I was really fortunate. I was in school for 6 years and got my bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and I got my master's in business administration. So I was able to land a really great job right out of college. And at the time, I was in a serious relationship with a young lady. I got this great job right after graduation. I ended up getting engaged pretty quickly thereafter. And then I bought a house, and I was driving around in this beautiful little BMW M Roadster that I loved. And I had a very outwardly wonderful life, to the point a lot of people would come up to me who had watched me grow up, or who knew me, or even friends that were my age, and said, "Man, you've got everything." And I really did. I thought just kind of I was following the American dream of graduate college, get a great job, make a lot of money, buy a house. I was engaged to be married, just had a very enviable life. And kind of fast forward almost a year from when I graduated, it was my 25th birthday, and some friends and the girl I was engaged to, they threw me a birthday party, a surprise birthday party. And I remember sitting there just in the middle of all of these people and feeling extremely miserable.
Wow.
And really alone. And it was God's grace to me, because I really had accomplished everything that I had come to tell myself I needed in order to be happy, and in order to have a satisfying life, and in order to have a life of purpose, and I didn't have any of that. And so there were, several events that happened, I would say, over the next year or so.
Mm-hmm.
But to make a long story short, I called off the wedding.
Wow.
I ended up selling my house, wrecking my car, and quitting my job.
Dang.
And I'll never forget, in the midst of all this, I was just a really broken person.
Mm-hmm.
And I had kind of gotten away from what I had grown up believing. I think I went almost a year, probably only going to church a handful of times. Mm-hmm. Never really opening my Bible, never really thinking a whole lot, like I said, mm-hmm. about anything other than the here and now, mm-hmm. and just, really striving for, maybe worldly pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I was sitting on my kitchen floor crying. I actually had been laying on the floor, like at my lowest point. Mm-hmm. And I sat up and I grabbed my Bible, which I hadn't opened in I don't know how long. And I just opened to what's become my favorite chapter, Romans 8. And, there's a lot in there that you can break down. But something that really jumped out to me was when Paul's talking about how creation is frustrated not by its own will, but by the will of God, actually, mm-hmm. who frustrates us in the hope that we'd be freed from our bondage to decay, to temporary things, and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. And I just remember, that may not be a direct application to us individually, mm-hmm. but I just remember thinking, I want that freedom. And I feel like I'm in bondage to decay, to all of these things that don't last. And it was really kind of the moment that I can point back to and say, God just really started to open my eyes and change my heart mm-hmm. towards what His big purpose for my life could be, mm-hmm. versus just the little dreams that I had of making money and going out and having fun, Mm-hmm. And so over that time period where I kind of disentangled myself mm-hmm. from all of those things, a guy who, it's pretty amazing looking back, this just kind of struck me. The same guy who's kind of like my second dad, mm-hmm. who got me into State Farm, who said, hey, I think you would really love being a State Farm agent. He invited me on a church mission trip mm-hmm. to Mexico. Wow. And I went on the trip. I had a really great time, and I ended up going again a year later. Mm-hmm. And it was at that point God really started to kind of, I think, open my heart towards international missions. Wow. And so probably, in this timeline, from when, I was at my lowest point there to, maybe a year and a half to 2 years later, actually quitting my job finally and leaving the United States and going and serving as an international missionary with the International Mission Board, mm-hmm. actually. And so that was a, really big shift mm-hmm. for me, going from somebody who, had this really great job where I was really proud of where I was headed and the money that I was making mm-hmm. and things like that to the mission field. Mm-hmm. It was just complete shift in my life purpose.
Yeah. And how long did you serve with the IBM for?
I was with the
IMB.
Yeah, I was with the IMB for a little over 3 years.
Okay.
So I went through a program that they still have. That's a great program called the Journeyman Program. Mm-hmm. And I was actually in Monterrey, Mexico, which it's like the last place I expected to go, but mm-hmm. it was really, God made it very plain to me that's where He wanted me to be. Mm-hmm. It was really cool because I ended up meeting my wife, Kristen, mm-hmm. Who was also in the Journeyman Program at the time. And I was in Mexico for a little over 2 years, and then most of my third year, maybe about 2.5 years, and then most of my third 3.5 years, I was back here in the United States, working with college students, really trying to mobilize college students to go to the mission field.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, you know, once you finished initially with the IMB, you did your 3.5 years. What was the transition after that, career wise? You know, did you just do, like, I don't know, work somewhere in, or what was that for you?
So yeah, that's really a great question. There's a couple years in there that are kind of a little bit of a time of wandering. So when I finished working with the International Mission Board, I was actually living in Oklahoma. I had bounced around to a few places, and
Closer, sorry.
what's that?
Closer to your, yeah.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
I had bounced around a few different places when I had come back from Mexico, and I actually was very, very close to taking a job as a multilingual church planter out in the LA area. At the time, the International Mission Board was bringing back young people who had been overseas and plugging them into a lot of bilingual church plants. And it's really interesting because I got back from a trip where I had basically been offered, this position, and the next day, I went to a church that I had not been to before, and I was just like, wow, this is the kind of place I've really been looking for to get involved in. I ended up making a decision to stay in Kentucky at the time and not take the job out in LA, which was really kind of shocking. I was like 99%. I was going to LA, and I ended up getting very involved there at that church. I ended up bouncing around to a couple jobs for maybe a year and a half. I was a Starbucks barista in Oklahoma, and then came back and served coffee for several, I guess maybe a year and a half in Kentucky. At the same time, I had a lot of people telling me, hey, you should look at going into education. I mentioned earlier, both my parents were teachers. My sister was a teacher. And so I had worked a lot with college students and some high school students when I was on the mission field. And then obviously back in the States, I was working with college students. So I really, I loved working with young people. And so I ended up going back and getting another degree to allow myself to go into education. And I became a high school math teacher.
Wow.
So yeah, I did that for about 8 years.
And so, now tell me about, because I do want to expand a little bit on the State Farm side of things. Where did the transition into State Farm head into? What was your thought process, or your opinion at least, like prior to being in the insurance business? Like, what was that for you?
Well, I at some point, and I can probably, pinpoint a couple spots, but at some point I realized I wasn't going to be a teacher for the rest of my life. I wasn't going to spend another 20, 25 years in that profession. And so I started looking at some other options. I ended up actually, for a short time period, maybe about 9 months or so, I ended up getting a lot of the licensing required to do financial planning, and I was kind of working for a financial planning group. I ended up, it wasn't a great fit for me. Not the place that I wanted to be long term, and I ended up leaving that job actually right before COVID hit. Ooh. And I left that in February of 2020, and I actually had 2 other job offers that both got kind of rescinded due to the COVID shutdown. And I found myself one day, I was working on my house, and I got an email from one of these companies that had said, hey, we'll be sending you your offer letter on Tuesday. And I got an email saying, hey, we're not going to be offering you this position. So before the end of that day, I had gotten a job at FedEx and a job at Amazon, because I needed to support my family.
Yeah.
I had, small children, and at that point we had, I think just my daughter and my middle son, or I guess my middle child, who's my oldest son. We hadn't had the youngest son yet. Anyway, I just started working like crazy kind of through the pandemic, and at some point during those months of 85, 90-hour weeks in warehouses, the same guy, the State Farm agent, came back to me and said, "Hey, I know I've mentioned this to you before," because he had several times, but he said, "I think you'd really love being a State Farm agent. I think you'd be really good at it." So I said, I can't go to my wife and say, "Hey, I'm gonna switch careers again." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But actually, when I started talking to Kristen, she was really positive, and she was just like, "Hey, if you think that's something that you would love to do, I'm supportive." And so I quit working at FedEx. I kept working full time at Amazon, and was able to work out a role with a State Farm agent who was actually a good friend of mine, where I worked at his office 35 hours a week, and then worked at Amazon about 40 hours a week.
Okay.
So I was still working crazy hours. But I kind of jumped into the insurance world, and that was really not that we don't do financial planning, because we do have the ability to do that in this role, but that was, I think, a little bit of a better fit for me.
Yeah. So, kind of like with State Farm specifically, right? Is there a process where you work your way up, or could you, just have certain licensing and certain prerequisites already to where you can already be the head of an agency? How does that work?
Yeah, so State Farm actually hires both ways. They when they're looking for new agents, they hire some what they would call externally, people who don't have any experience with State Farm, but as you mentioned, have the appropriate licensing, and I think they like to see, that there's some experience there, in this field. But I do know of agents who have not had a ton of experience, but maybe have been able to cross over from another industry where they were successful. The vast majority of State Farm agents that I know did start by working at another agency.
Okay.
Excuse me. And kind of, got a few years of experience in place before they went and took over their own office.
So if I want to own my own agency, like, do I have, like, Chick-fil-A, for instance, to have your own franchise, you pay a certain fee up front. Do you have to pay a certain fee with State Farm?
It's a little different with State Farm. If somebody wants to own their own agency, I would say, go work for a really good agent and get that experience. So State Farm is a little bit different. It's not the type of opportunity where, you purchase a book of business from the company. So State Farm, maintains their book of business, but it is a phenomenal opportunity, and I would, I love talking to people about it.
Yeah.
But that is one of the, I think, benefits is, while they do expect you to have some financial resources that you can invest, you are a small business owner.
Yeah.
And so you do want to have the financial resources to be able to invest in yourself and invest in your business. You don't have to, purchase a book of business, so to speak, to start as an agent. And matter of fact, I kind of like the way that State Farm, I think, protects its customers and its brand and its reputation by, not just allowing the book of business to be sold to the highest bidder or whoever it would be. They are very, intentional about that process of making sure that people who are becoming agents really believe in and are going to hold to the core values of the company and really take care of the customer.
Yeah. And, jumping from that, so are you in a position where you're able to just, like, kind of, I don't know, be with your family or hang out, or do you have to be here for a certain amount of hours as the head of an agency, or how does that look like for you?
I know some agents who have been in the business for a very long time, who have really great teams in place that are really experienced, who, have a lot of freedom. And I think that's one of the great benefits of being a small business owner is the freedom that it affords you. But, anybody who's familiar with what it's like to own your own business knows it takes a ton of work and a ton of effort. So, I will say I've slept on the floor here in the office on multiple occasions this year, and I've just worked straight through the night on multiple occasions. Matter of fact, one of my concerns today was that I was going to look a little haggard because this week has been rough. My family's out of town, for Thanksgiving right now. I'm going to meet up with them this week, but I've probably worked 14, 16-hour days for most of the last week. So, that's something I'm happy to do because, again, I have a long-term mindset of, what I believe we're capable of achieving here with the agency. But yeah, it's a balance between all the hard work that you put in to make your business successful and that freedom of, when you're a small business owner, you're kind of able to make a lot of decisions. You know what I mean? Yeah. I can easily say, hey, we're closed on Thanksgiving Day and the day after. You know what I mean? So it's nice.
And with between having 3 kids, your wife, your relationship with God, and then your work life as well, how do you make sure to balance everything to where you're not overflowing one over the other or prioritizing one over the other? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I would say that's honestly one of the areas that I'm really still trying to work on. I've had a bad habit my entire life of taking on too much stuff. Yeah. And so one of the conversations and agreements, I guess, that my wife and I had when we started talking about this and when we decided to move here to Florida and start this agency was I was going to really limit myself to the number of things that I said yes to. Yeah. And so boundaries. Yeah, for sure. Boundaries. And I think just for me, for most of my life, it's been a hard decision to say no to a good thing. Even if I don't have any extra time, I look at it and I say, oh, that's a good thing. And so I've really had to discipline myself because there are so many good things that we can give ourselves to. And I think, just realizing I'm not capable, which is hard because I can be a prideful person, right? Yeah. And so realizing I'm not capable of doing more than a handful of things really well. Yeah. And that I do want to really prioritize and focus. And matter of fact, my wife and I just talked this weekend, and I said, I even kind of want to try to hone in on a fewer things than I am even right now, and just make sure that I'm doing those basic things well. Yeah. But yeah, that is a challenge for me. Yeah. So I will say though, if I look back 2 years ago to where I am right now, I've definitely decreased the number of things that I'm involved in. Yeah. And I'll say one other thing too that I've just been really convicted about lately. I don't think I'm alone in this, but I love to be entertained. And I've realized that one of the biggest hindrances towards me meeting my personal goals, and I think as I look around at those around me, just a big hindrance towards us being able to properly prioritize our lives is the fact that I spend so much time being entertained, and I think we as a culture have just gotten really used to that. Yeah. And I always, I like to read biographies. I like to study people throughout history. And sometimes I wonder, how did they get so much stuff done? How did they, with no technology, with very limited resources, sometimes I'm blown away by how much people were able to accomplish. And I've just been really convicted that they had a much greater focus on those few important things. Whereas, we know everything that's going on all over the world. We are, constantly entertained by something on our phone, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I've really been trying to discipline myself to not get distracted. Again, not necessarily by bad things, but just we have access to too many things, in my opinion, sometimes.
I agree. And that's funny. Going back to focusing on a few things or a couple things at a time. About 1 to 2 years ago, I'm always thinking like different forms of income or growing in different areas, different ways. But I remember talking to someone from our church one time where, I was telling him about real estate and stock market and this and that. And he told me, he was like, oh, that's great, but focus on one thing. Dominate one thing. And that's something that hit me. And so, from a financial standpoint, I started to look at the stock market. Obviously, I've always looked at the stock market, but I wanted to dominate that, focus on that, get that in. And then once you feel like you've come to a point where like you've mastered it and you've like kind of, in a way, established dominance, okay, now when you feel fully fledged, fully comfortable, and that's like on its own, boom, on to the next thing, but not trying to take multiple tasks at the same time. And that's honestly too how some, if not most, millionaires are made. Like they don't look at, how can I do multiple things in multiple ways, but more so, okay, I'm going to focus on this one thing, and then from that, like as you get older, you diversify, your risk goes lower, but they've always focused on one thing at a time, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people in today's day and age, there's a bunch of entrepreneurs. It's like, how do I make multiple forms of money in a quick way, because of instant gratification. But I've noticed that if you just focus on one thing, dominate that, and then grow from that, then you could branch off, but you got that one thing, So yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll just a lot of the things that I say, I'm really talking about myself, not the culture or other people. But we are very impatient. I'm very impatient.
Yeah.
And it is very challenging to put in the long, hard hours and days and weeks and years sometimes on one thing, when a lot of the success stories that we gravitate to are people that achieved wild success very quickly. And, that's not normal. And I think, again, we have access to so much information these days. We're able to see, people who maybe became really good at something really quickly.
Yeah.
And there's definitely something to be said about, continuous positive movement in a good direction, right? And, I was actually talking to one of my team members about this yesterday. We want everything to be right now. Like, I see something, I want to be good at it, I want to achieve in that area, and I want it to happen yesterday. Whereas, we don't realize the people that have really become successful in most areas, it's the long, tedious work of getting up every day and doing the right things and doing what you're supposed to do and growing. They talk about, becoming an expert, taking, 10,000 hours and various things like that. If you think about just doing something full-time for 1 year, for most people, that's 2,000 hours. It's going to take 5 years of doing something full-time to become that expert in it.
Yeah.
And most of us, including myself in this, just don't have to exercise a lot of patience in most areas of our lives right now.
Yeah. So we're about to wrap up. I know you got to go soon, but like, what's your vision and your plan long-term, 10, 20 years from now, between your family, State Farm, and just, growth in general?
Yeah, so, this is an area, again, where I have to be really disciplined because I can, get all these wild dreams out there and get distracted from those little hard things that I have to do day to day. Business-wise, I'm actually in the process of hiring 2 new people right now. I think I got too big too quick in my first year. I'll just be really honest. I had 5 or 6 employees at one point, and wasn't able to train people the way that they needed to be because it was just too fast. And so we've kind of slowed that down. But I want to, really become one of the top agencies in South Florida. I want to grow slowly in a way that allows my team members to experience the most success that they can, and therefore allows our agency to experience some really great success and just really take care of our customers well. The 2 people that I'm hiring right now aren't salespeople. They're here to serve the customer because I've realized that's how we're going to be most successful long term. Within, I'd say the next 5 to 7 years, I'd love to be looking to open a second agency with State Farm, but we have to get one agency running really, really well. Family-wise, my family's still kind of in a transition period of getting used to living in South Florida, and my kids are actually up there loving a little bit of snow and like cold weather right now, but I'm not missing that. But I'd really like to get to a point where we can get a house with a big yard. We live in a nice little condo right now, but I grew up with a really nice size yard, playing out in the yard, doing all kinds of fun stuff in the woods. Our house in Kentucky before we moved here, we had a woods and a creek and a hill and all that stuff, and so I hope to have a nice spot to toss a ball and kick a ball and play with my kids in the yard and have friends over. You know what I'm saying? So that's really kind of the goals there, and just I was talking to Kristen, my wife, about this past weekend, just really wanting to invest in my children like my parents did with me. At a young age, I came to know Christ because of the investment that my parents put in me. And it's one of the 2 things I pray for my kids every day, is that they would be saved and that they would live their lives for God's glory. And so, just really trying to invest my time into my wife and into my kids. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot. Again, I'm trying to be really disciplined in limiting myself because I know I can't accomplish 10 great things. I'm going to try for 2 or 3 and then see where we can go from there.
That's awesome, Josh. And, last thing real quick, do you want to plug, any social media, any websites, if people want to, purchase insurance, whatever the case may be, what's the best way to contact you?
Oh, yeah, for sure. You can go to agentjoshwalton.com. That's our business website. I'm a guy actually called the agency the other day and said, it's really easy to get your cell phone. I said, that's intentional. That is intentional. I want people to be able to get a hold of me. I'm maybe not the most interesting follow, but I'm on Facebook. I don't tweet. I don't do Instagram. I'm look at me. I'm kind of an old guy here. I actually am going to really try to expand our business social media presence this year. We've been starting to get a lot more leads that way, and as I get to know more and more people down here in South Florida, obviously I want people to be able to get in touch with us. But yeah, that we're pretty easy to find, and I've always been that kind of person. Like, I want people to be able to get in touch with me.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Hey, you are very welcome. It's been great getting to chat.